I was adopted into a loving Christian family as a little part Aboriginal baby. My family consisted of 3 natural-born sons, and the family was just beautiful. Later on, we were to increase with another adopted daughter, so I had a sister. My family were a farming family, lived in a quiet community. They were a Christian family, and I was only ever really in relationship with other church-going people. So I had a really protected childhood in this loving Christian family. Life for me on the farm was amazing. I had the farm to explore endlessly. I had any pet I could ever want, be it cow, sheep, horse, chooks. Idyllic. I really had a wonderful idyllic childhood, and I was really thankful for being adopted into that family. It was really hard to imagine at that time, living in such an idyllic little world, what was to happen to me within the space of a few short years. I was being groomed from the age of 3 by a church elder, and he was a charismatic man. He was a friend of every kid, and he was always playing with us. So kids gravitated to him, and he would hand me lollies every weekend, and I'd go rushing to him every time I went to church because he'd have a pocket full of lollies, and I'd have to dig my hand into his pocket to get lollies out. He would never give them to me. I had to dig in. And he'd go playing on the swings with us, and reflectively I can now know that he was overstretching my boundaries, my personal space boundaries from a little kid by helping me onto the swings. His hands would be in inappropriate places as he positioned us on swings or on ponies. He had ponies, I had ponies. We were always having pony rides. So he was grooming me, and I was losing sight of my personal space by his genitalia touching about my genitalia. This went on, of course, for several years. My parents were unaware. All the other adults seemed unaware, and I just thought it was normal behaviour, and I learnt to think that was normal behaviour from a man. Unfortunately, at the age of 9 was when he sexually molested me for the first time, and it was on a typical church Saturday afternoon. There was a whole group of families would meet up at my place, or my family's farm, and we'd drive around the paddocks. My dad would show off the animals that he was breeding, and during an entourage around the farm with many cars, I hopped into the perpetrator's car, not expecting anything except to be driven back to the farmhouse for lunch. But he drove over to a paddock, nearby paddock, to look at some ponies, and it was there that he digitally penetrated me for the first time. And at that time, he threatened me. He said if I ever told anyone, I'd be sent back to the orphanage. And I was terrified. And straight after that happening to me, we drove back to the family house, which was only 150 metres away. And I had to go into the family and pretend nothing had happened. And I couldn't stay there, so I took off into the paddocks running. And that became something I did. Every time he abused me, I'd run into the paddocks for hours, usually by myself. Now, he sexually molested me for a couple of years every time he could. And I was 11 when he first raped me. And I couldn't tell anyone. He'd rape me anywhere, whether it would be at church, Sabbath school, social events, his farm, every opportunity. And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't tell anyone. I was too scared. I lost my identity. I had to hold my emotions in place. I learnt not to cry. I learnt not to let on to anyone what was happening. I had to be quiet. I began to lose my identity the very first day that the sexual abuse started. I was 9. I became a runner into the paddocks. I became a loner. I didn't dare tell my family what was happening to me in case I'd be given back to the orphanage. I put on many behaviours to protect myself. I withdrew from people. I became monosyllabic in my tone of voice. I didn't dare show my emotions to people. I was frightened that I would be sent back. As I got older, the behaviour patterns got worse and worse and worse. I withdrew. Because I couldn't show emotions, later on when I was in adult relationships and had children of my own, they thought I was non-emotional and a hard person. I was a really caring person, but people didn't see that. Especially my kids, it was really hard on them. And I suppose on my previous relationships. I became over-controlling in any situation I was able to be in control of. I wasn't free to be me, and as an adult, I was really unhappy in the state I was. I lost my identity for nearly 35 years, and it was only when I began healing that I was able to get my true identity back. Now, after being sexually abused from the ages of 11 to 15, almost weekly, I was so looking forward to going to boarding school. Boarding school was something that we had to do as country kids because I came from a closed, isolated country community. And the boarding school I was going to was a church boarding school, so I was really looking forward to that and catching up with some friends that I'd met from other churches. I didn't fit in with the other girls at the school because I just knew too much to be a girl and do the girly things that they all wanted to do. I had been a loner. I had wanted to run out into the bush and the paddocks all my life, and I couldn't do this in the confines of the college. So I was deemed to have strange behaviours that weren't accepted by the people of the college. After 6 months at the college, I was expelled for these behaviours. No one asked where these behaviours may have come from. I was unhappy with being expelled, and I thought the church had been hypocritical in expelling me without finding out what was wrong. After I was expelled from the college, I had to further my education by going to live with a non-Christian relative and attend a large metropolitan school. I was exposed to the world at this point. I hadn't had any exposure to cigarettes or alcohol or drugs or partying, and I was now exposed to the world. Just before my 16th birthday, whilst walking home from this large metropolitan school I was now going to on a very busy road, I began to notice that there was this car regularly every day following me home from school. And after I would go home from school, I would head off to the beach for a swim, and this car followed me there too. After about 3 weeks of doing this, the guy who was in the car spoke to me and he invited me out. This guy was 9 years older than me, and he was very worldly and very independent. I was just a naive schoolgirl, naive to the world. This was the beginning of a long-term relationship with this person. I became totally infatuated with him, but I called it love at the time. In this relationship, I was to have 4 children to him, but he would never marry me. He was very controlling. He controlled what I wore, who I saw, who I spoke to, who I called on the phone. In fact, I wasn't allowed to do much at all with him. I became very scared of this man. I didn't know what sort of mood he would be in every time he came home from work. I began to tread on eggshells. I lost my identity totally at this stage. It was at this stage that I began to put on other behaviours to help me cope. I went back to work and I began studying full-time to gain a degree. My life had become a mess. I'd kept it a secret inside myself for so many years. I'd tried to compensate with everything. I was a loner. I was an overachiever. I was a workaholic. They were my addictive behaviours. My life was a total mess. I was a mum of 4 kids. I was busy with them, yet I worked full-time as a nurse at night time, and I studied at uni full-time during the day. After 40 years of keeping my secret, couldn't work out what life was about. I was in a real bad relationship. My emotional needs weren't met. Nothing was worth. I contemplated what life was about. Was it worth living? To me, I just couldn't fathom whether it was or not. But I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't know a way out of the mess. One of the coping mechanisms I put in place was becoming an adrenaline junkie. I had to do things, live at a fast pace. I was burning out. I had 3 hours sleep in 24 hours, and this was 24/7 for many, many years, working full-time, studying full-time mum, busy, 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 burdened under Satan's yoke. If you don't deal with psychological issues in your life, they will manifest themselves as physiological problem at some stage in your life, and this was happening to me. I was working at such a frantic pace that I ended up having adrenal burnout, and this nearly became fatal. I had bilateral subdural hematomas, and I wasn't expected to live from that. I had no relationship with God for many years. I knew he was there, but I didn't have a relationship with him. And it was when I was at the depths of my despair with life, I began to question where was God, and I began to put him back into my life. And it was only with him was I able to put in place the strategies to overcome what had happened to me. I was living a life of busyness. I was very angry. I was angry at the world. I was angry at my perpetrator. I was resentful. I had bitterness. I wanted retaliation to him. This consumed my life for 30 odd years. My life was a mess. It was full of busyness. I had no control over it. I just wanted out of it. I was working full-time. I was studying full-time. I was a full-time mother. I was stuck in this insane pattern which was killing me, destroying my life, but it was awful for everyone around me. I got to the point where there was nothing left in me. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know where to go. It was all too much for me. Everything had consumed me. My busyness had gone overboard. I had nothing left in me. I had to look for something else. Everything I did, I was doing the same thing over and over again, the same way, expecting a different result. That's insanity. I had to think about my sanity. What was I doing this for? I was thinking that maybe God could help me. So I had to put my faith in him, and that was my leap of faith. I had tried everything. I'd come to the bottom of the barrel as to my resources. There was nowhere else for me to go. I was desperate. I had to try God. I made the decision to turn everything over to God. I moved away to another state from the chaotic place I was in. I began a relationship with a new man. With him, I was able to begin healing, and it was with his encouragement that I went back to church. And that was a hard ordeal for me to do too, because I was angry at what I had perceived they had done to me. So that was an issue that I had to face. I went back to the church to face the people who I believed had hurt me, and I began to slowly heal. God had given me a partner who listened to me. God gave me friends, new friends I found in the church who listened to me, heard me, held me, loved me, supported me, and helped me heal. So turning things over to God was finally helping me heal. So God was supplying me with a supportive group of friends that just helped me move further and further along the road to recovery. I began to do a moral inventory of myself. I had to look at myself with real eyes and see whether I had been good or bad in everything I had done, and I realised that I hadn't been. I had failed miserably. I had hurt people. I had hurt particularly my kids. My kids had suffered from me, and in that way I was abusive to them. I had hurt relationships I'd been in. Had I been truthful in all my relationships and all my doings? No, I hadn't. I had to make a conscious choice as to what attitude I would have, whether I would be good or bad. And I had to do this with every action I did or every word I spoke. That was my moral inventory of myself and my way forward in this mess of my life. Talking about attitudes, we have to choose as to whether we're good or bad. One of the indicators that came up for me on my moral inventory was I was very good at road rage. I was very impatient with other drivers, and I sure let them know. But when I was considering this, I had to assess and ask God how He wanted me to deal with it. So from that point on, I was able to make a decision as to how I would act when things went wrong for me. When I was faced with incidents of road rage, I was able to decide, am I going to be good or bad? And I thank God for putting me in that position, or giving me the ability to do that. Coming to the stage of admitting my wrongs, I referred to James 5:16, the biblical verse that says, confess your sins to God, yourself, and to someone you trust. Sure, I'd admitted my sins to God. God had heard me, but did I feel peace and calmness in my life? No, I realised there was something still missing. I had to admit my sins to myself. First of all, get out of my denial and admit that I had done things bad. Yeah, okay, so I've admitted to God. I've admitted to myself. I'm out of my denial. Now I have to confess my sins to someone I trust. How could I do this? I didn't want my sins spread all over the world. So in the small groups, I found a small group of women, and I did trust these women. And I was able to talk about my sins as they were, and these women loved and supported me. So confessing my sins to God, myself, and someone I loved, or someone I trusted, was okay. I did it in the small group. Small groups are safe. Nothing I said went outside the walls, and nothing they said went beyond me. So I was safe in that. I admitted my sins to people I had wronged, and this was really hard to do. I had to go out and tell them, and I had to do it without regard to what their response to me was. As long as I was doing the right thing as God wanted me to do, I had to admit my sins to the people, and this was hurtful to me. My pride was hurt. I came to the step where God removes defects of character. Now, God had given me authentic people to mix with, or in my small group that I was able to share openly and tell the truth to, and I was very grateful for this. I was able to see that my life of busyness and addictive behaviours were brought about by my unease of the situation in my life. I was able to see that my life of anger, bitterness and resentment was brought about by me holding on to it, me holding myself as a prisoner to the anger and bitterness and resentment. I had to learn to forgive. That was a character defect of mine, not being able to forgive. It was a character defect of mine to hold on to the anger and resentment and the bitterness. Man, was I in a prison. It was only when I was able to forgive the perpetrator or the sexual abuse that had happened to me when I was a kid that I got control back of my life after 35 years of living in anger, bitterness and resentment. Man, what a heavy jail that was. Oh, it wrecked my whole life. I wasted that much of my life. It was only when I learnt to deal with my own character defects was I able to move on in life and live a life of joy and peace. Looking at my shortcomings, I'd realised that I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse. But I realised that I'd used this as a reason for my behaviours and used it as an excuse for my behaviours. I was wrong to do this. Sure, I was a victim of child sexual abuse, but it really wasn't enough to blame all my behaviours on that having happened to me. That really wasn't fair. I had to be accountable for my own behaviours. My perpetrator wasn't accountable for my behaviours that I put onto other people. And here it was, I was abusing my own kids and family and friends for what had happened to me. It wasn't their fault. I was abusing my kids in a different way just by being over-controlling and a demanding mum. That's how I was abusing my kids. I was pretty hard on my kids, and that was a shortcoming that I had put in place. But I was using it as an excuse that I had been victim of childhood sexual abuse. Okay, that happened to me, but hey, it wasn't right that I was using it as an excuse to hurt other people. Not right at all. I had to make a list of all the people that I had to make amends to. I'd hurt my kids. I'd really damaged them in a lot of ways. I had been a controlling, overbearing mother. I had put undue pressure on my kids to be high achievers in both academic and sporting fields. I was known as the ice queen to a lot of people. I was non-emotional. I didn't show love and affection to my kids and to people around me. I was cold and aloof, yet I knew I was caring and considerate in my being, but I wasn't able to show it simply because for many years I had to run away and withdraw my emotions and hide my emotions. And now as an adult, I was hurting people with this inability to be loving and care or show caring. I was a loner, so I wasn't a social person, and I didn't seek out friends and family to go and spend a lot of time with. I was always withdraw. I'd go off by myself, doing lone activities. That was me. I wasn't used to sharing. So past relationships were damaged by me. I had to ask forgiveness of these people that I'd harmed. Making amends was really one of the toughest steps I had to do. It was really the most embarrassing step I had to do. It's where I had to confront people or face up to people and admit what I'd done and make amends, ask forgiveness. So this was tough. I'd hurt so many people during my life. I'd hurt my kids, I'd hurt neighbours, I'd hurt relatives, I'd hurt partners, etc. And facing up to this, admitting it and making amends was tough. With my kids, I actually wrote letters to them and just asked for forgiveness with explanations as to my behaviour, not addressing their part in it ever at all. With my ex, I had to write him a letter, but unfortunately I believe he threw it in the bin, so he was never realised, I suppose, my asking of forgiveness from him for my actions in the relationship. I had to admit to people like a cousin that I used her name as a 16-year-old. When I stole something, I used her name. And she wouldn't speak to me for many, many years, and that was pretty tough and hurtful. But I had to write a letter to her, and once again, I really don't know her response to that letter or even if she read it. But I know it was the right thing for me by God that I did such a step towards making amends. I have to make amends for everything I do these days on a daily basis. If I've harmed someone or hurt somebody, if I've been rude to someone when I've been driving or in the shops, I have to apologise. And that is a conscious decision that I have to do. And by the grace of God, I'm able to do that. But it is a tough step, making amends. I have to really look at myself on a daily basis. This is my personal inventory of myself to make sure that my behaviour is the way God wants me to be. This gives me peace of mind if I know that I'm doing the right thing by Him. I know when I'm angry and resentful and show bitterness and impatience to people that that's not good behaviour and that's not how God wants me to behave. I really have to address my behaviours on a momentary basis throughout the day to make sure that I'm doing good rather than bad. Addressing my personal inventory is an everyday thing, and I really have to make a conscious effort to do it. I have to make a conscious decision every day to bring God into my life. I have to do this for my own well-being. I have to ask Him for the exact words He wants me to use. I'd rather use His words than my words. I often talk or communicate with God throughout the day, be it at the sink or in the garden or just playing with the dogs. I have a conversation with God and show Him how grateful I am for where He's put me in this life now compared to where I was, because without Him, I wouldn't be where I am now. When I was little, my mum modelled talking to Jesus with me. She said when the tasks were very difficult or they weren't really to my liking, She'd just say, have a pleasant talk to Jesus, and he'd say, it's just one step at a time, Shell, you'll get there. And that has carried me through my mum's words, and knowing that they were how Jesus spoke to her and said, you can do it, Shell, just one step at a time, you'll get there. I find that talking to God is really a peaceful way to progress through life. When I talk to him, I'm often faced with a decision that I have to do regarding either the words I say or an action I have to do, and I just say, is this what Jesus would do? Do I want to be good or bad? And I always choose to be good, of course, and I know that's what Jesus would do, and it gives me a wonderful sense of being at peace with God, knowing that I'm doing what he wants me to do. God never wastes a hurt, and this wonderful passage in Jeremiah 29:11 is my favourite verse. For I know the plans I have for you, plans to give you hope, peace and a future. And that has given me such peace throughout my life, and particularly since recovery. It's wonderful now to be able to say there was a purposeful or a reason why I went through what I had to go through. As much as it was harsh and horrible, and I don't want anyone else to go through it, my purpose in life now is wonderful, because I can now go out and show other people that they too can overcome the same things that happened to me when I was a kid. So I love that. God has given me purpose in this life to show that my story and my overcoming can give them hope, that they too can have hope, peace and the future in their lives. It's interesting to note that Jesus in all his parables always says that when he's healed people, that now I want you to go and tell the world what I have done for you. And I get that message. You know, I was healed from the insanity of my life, and now I can tell the world or other people about what has happened to me and how I overcame, and that God was the power that helped me overcome. So that's my message to you guys. You can overcome. God will give you power, and you can have a hope, peace and a future in your lives. My name's Michelle Hood, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. And with his power, I've overcome many ordeals and issues in my life. Thank you for letting me share.